Hello, I'm Mary Denman. With me today is Peg Armstrong, the noted psychotherapist who spent 25 years specializing in grief and bereavement issues. Today she's addressing a different issue about death. What to do when all of the medical options have been exhausted. We're calling it How to Be with Someone Who's Dying. Peg, Woody Allen is supposed to have said, "I'm not afraid to die, I just don't want to be there." Everybody laughed when he said it, I'm sure. But is that a proper attitude to have about death?
It's absolutely wrong. It was funny, but it's absolutely wrong. When we choose to live in consciousness on our own terms, when our time comes to die, we choose to die in consciousness on our own terms. I think we very much do want to be there, many of us. Most of us long for a deeper experience with life and impermanence and meaning and suffering and fair and unfair.
Why is it so important for us to discuss this matter?
3 reasons, really. First of all, being with someone who's dying can be such a rich, meaningful, even transformational experience.
Really?
And secondly, if you're really with the person in full consciousness, it can soften and shorten your grieving process. And thirdly, it makes our own transition easier because we've gotten clear on those questions, the human predicament, and then our transition is easier.
Why is it so hard for us to discuss anything that deals with death?
Fear, just straight fear. You've got the fear of the dying person, which is generally that they're going to be in pain, that they'd be alone, that they'd be a burden. But larger than that is our fears, the ones who are companions to the dying. Because when you're seeing someone else's mortality, you are face to face with your own. And it forces you to look at those existential questions, which are hard to face. Is there really a God? What happens after we die? What role does fate play? Why is there suffering? Why is there injustice? Does life have meaning? Does our life have meaning? Where do we come from? What are we to do here? And where do we go?
All right, now if I'm the one who's there, don't I have to work on myself as much as I do the dying person?
Oh, absolutely. That's really the hard part. Thomas Mann in The Magic Mountain went as far as to say, a man's dying is more the survivor's affair than his own. And certainly the work of the dying person is very personal and very private, and no 2 deaths are ever going to be the same. But this is every bit as much about the walk that we're making. It's a dual journey. We're just different places on the continuum.
Well, people in many cultures seem to be very much at ease talking about death. Why are we here in America so afraid of it?
I think it comes from Americans being such a good can-do country. We take care of it. We built this nation in 200 years. And that sets us up to this doing. That's what's the best thing. What would help is to do something. And we're very good at doing things. And that's not what is really there in being with somebody who's dying. You've got human beings and human doings. And we're much better at this part. We're very uncomfortable with just being. It makes me think of Desjardins said we're not human beings trying to experience the spiritual plane. We're spirits trying to experience this plane. And coming and sending the card, coming by, bringing some food is something we do comfortably. I know I am most effective when I've come just to be there. Don't come to do anything. And the doing of things gets you off being. And you can get lost in the mechanics of doing things for the dying person when the real work, Mary, is the quality of the exchange between the two people. And then also, Americans still think of dying as a medical event. And it's not a medical event.
It isn't.
It's much more about spiritual issues and psychological issues and emotional issues. And it's really not that much about the body. It's more about the heart and the mind and our connections to the people that we love. Also, we've been able to provide such security and comfort in American life. And it sets us up to think that anything that's hard or uncomfortable, just something's gone wrong and we ought to fix that. And of course it's hard to lose somebody that you can't imagine living without. Of course it's difficult. The work of going inside and looking at everything you believed and the stories you've told yourself about life just don't hold up.
So it sounds as if we're uncomfortable when we're not in charge.
Absolutely. If you look for meaning, you're not going to get very far. Dying, like birthing, is about mystery. And mystery doesn't require any action. It requires attention.
So it's better to be than to do. But aren't there some practical things we can do?
To make it richer, yes. One is just simply centering yourself every time you enter the room. Remind yourself, stay centered. I think you should say up front, soon, and maybe many times, I choose to be here, I want to be here, and I'm here for the long haul.
Something they really need to hear.
Yes. Make eye contact more often than you do with people when you're just hanging out together. If you are a hugger, when you come in and hug them hello or hug them goodbye, could you just hold it a minute? Just a minute more. I think it's important some of the time to come one at a time. That when we bring friends, we'll all go over and visit Jane. Part of what you're doing is saying things can't get too intimate if we do it that way. That's when you have the television on and glance up at the television while the dying person is there. If the setting is not your own home for your end-of-life care, if you're in a hospital or a nursing home, the more you individualize the room with family photos or a favorite quilt, the more comfortable the person is. To give them choices, that we disenfranchise the dying sometimes by coming in and saying, Uncle Fred's going to come by this afternoon, but you never said, would you like Uncle Fred to come? Not everybody who wants to come does the dying person want to see.
Right.
I even once with a client, she said, I've said everything I have to say to these people. And we worked out a plan if she would call people up and say, I've called to tell you goodbye.
Oh, an interesting approach.
But it gave her, you decide who comes. Or just to ask something as simple as, do you want to have your bath before lunch or do you want to do it late this afternoon? To give some choice. Another idea is when you do something for someone, if what you've got to do is change the sheets or brush their hair, there's a way to do it that's a goal. The point is to get the tangles out of the hair. What if the point were to do this as a meditation or as a prayer, like the rosary? You can make a bed keeping in mind that there's no pleasure in the activities. There's pleasure in the attention to the activities.
Okay.
If you make that bed knowing this is what I'm desiring to do to make my friend comfortable, then...
So it's your motivation that really matters.
Yes. Yes. How you do it.
How do you prepare to do something is what still seems to me a very difficult thing to do.
You yourself get as clear as you can about these questions of, do you believe in afterlife? Why do people go through suffering? The clearer you get on all these questions, the benefits, the dying person gets the fallout of your clarity. And being strong is not important. It's important that you be with a capital B-E, that you show up, that you stay present. There's just no time here for anything that's play-like or phony baloney. And you can't be faint of heart to do it. It is hard work. It will change you. And you will never regret that you stayed absolutely present. Very often what people come to see me about is, how do they be with this person who's dying? And they'll say, I'm scared. Or before I go in the room, I'm really frightened. What if you could be real enough to be brave enough to say, I'm scared?
Right out loud.
Just right there, I'm scared. And it doesn't destroy hope to ask questions bravely.
What's my main responsibility in being here for this person?
There's an Aboriginal saying that I like a lot that says, if you've come to help me, go away. If you've come because our destinies are wrapped up in each other, then come in.
Interesting.
And if I come as the helper, then you have to be the helpless one.
Mm-hmm.
If I imagine I'm going to fix something, you have to be broken. If I'm the caregiver, then you have to be the care receiver. And I know that I'm least effective when I imagine I've come for you rather than just to be with you. To really be present in a way you've never done that before, with a deep effort for authenticity. There is such an opportunity, Mary, to heal ourselves in this when there is no cure. To heal our relationships with ourselves and with the dying person. A cure is medical, and a healing is a conscious spiritual encounter. There's a level of authenticity. We want to soothe people and fix things and make it all right. And I think a better posture is to acknowledge what they said, to just witness an Old Testament word. If a woman said, my children, all I wanted was my children to love each other and be close, and they're just not.
Which happens.
Yes. And if what you're thinking is, Lord, they aren't. These kids just... Rather than saying, oh, now they're going to come around, don't you worry. If you just witness what they said of, no, they don't seem to, and that's sad. Or a man who said to me once, my marriage, we both should have left. The want to say, now there, you and Jane love each other. To say, maybe so, and that's sad. But not to rush to fix things.
You keep talking about being present. How does that differ from being present with somebody else in any other circumstance?
Well, I'm reminded of the perfect attendant pin that we would get and add to each year. But were we paying attention?
Not usually.
And the report card checked perfect attendance. But were we paying attention? And it requires a showing up and paying that kind of attention. I'm reminded of a woman that I was with who was dying in the next couple of days. And she was looking out the window and she said, Peg, what time is it? And I said, 2:45. And she said, I knew that. I can watch the shadows of the leaves on the trees and tell within 10 minutes, 15 minutes what time it is. And that's a good example of how you be present. Could we be that attentive? Also, if you're not, if you are just there as a social visit, or if you're staying very far back from dying, It's going to frighten you. You're going to have a lot of regrets later, and you're going to have self-judgments.
Is there a turning point in this process when you need to change your posture?
The moment you realize that there is no medical regime, that your friend or your family member is dying, you have to say to yourself, I choose to do this. I choose to walk this path with them, to be a companion. A constant choice, because if you don't remind yourself, I'm choosing to do this, this is when things become burdens and duties and obligatory. Acknowledge to yourself that you're frightened. No two deaths are alike, and you're not going to be prepared. The challenging of your beliefs again. That's, I think, the turning point is when it really occurs to you that this is it.
What sort of questions are appropriate to ask the dying one?
Well, their wishes come first, certainly. They take the lead. But to ask at some point, are you at peace with what's happening? Are there things that are concerning you? How do I keep my cream gravy from getting lumpy? What's most important to you right now? I very often say, I don't want to waste our time, but I don't know if I know how to use it. Is there anybody you want me to send for? And if what keeps coming up for you is, I don't know how I'm going to be here without you, what if you said that?
Just came right out with it.
Yeah. Rather than say, how can I help you? Mm-hmm. It is much better to say, how can we help each other? Then the giving and receiving business has gotten equal. The human being trying to be in the spiritual plane, or the spirit trying to be in the human plane. Also, forgiveness is a very big part of the dying process for a lot of people.
Oh, I'm sure.
To be sure, this is the time to say, if you haven't, please forgive me, I forgive you, I love you, I regret that time that. Some people want to remember together, even go over photograph albums. And what to do with the silence. Can you just hold a place for that and say something like, I hold you in my heart? Or bless your heart.
Peg, would you describe the dying process, please?
It's a process of each system turning down, not off.
Sort of like a rheostat.
Yes, it turns down slowly, and the body knows with each particular disease what system should turn down. The body knows how to birth us into this world, and the body knows how to birth us back out. It's very much like the birthing, the transformation of energy. There's a nursing book I like very much that invites nurses who are doing work with terminally ill patients to think of themselves as a midwife. There's a metaphor too, Mary, that there's several indigenous tribes on different continents who conceptualize the world as the four elements of earth, air, fire, and water. Mm-hmm. And if you think of the body as the earth element, it will just get too heavy to drag around, and you take to bed.
Okay.
And then the fire element begins to get unregulated, that people are hot and cold and their skin is blotchy. The water element is, as we begin to dry up, the skin's dry, the dehydration starts, but we leave on the last breath the same way we came in on the first breath. And then kind of a far out image, one of my teachers, Ram Dass, likens it to death is like taking off a tight shoe.
Oh, I like that metaphor.
Isn't that good?
Are there some clues that let you know that when the moment is close at hand, the actual dying?
If we can make a frame of, because it's never the same, but maybe 3 days out, 3 hours out, there's a restlessness. Sometimes people pick at their clothing or their bedclothes, but it's more of a chemical anxiety than emotional anxiety, and pretty easy to solve by putting in anti-anxiety meds with the pain meds. Very often eye movement is rapid and not focusing and upward. I don't know what that's about. There's congestion in the throat, which sounds worse than it seems to be feeling. It's that the normal phlegm that we would swallow down or cough up, there's not that much energy with the dying person. Extremities get cold and kind of blotchy. And almost always, the last clue would be that the breathing gets irregular. And there's a short inhale, a very long exhale, and then some pauses. And it can go on for a couple days, it can go on for a couple hours. It seems to me that the dying person sleeps through the last part usually, and not necessarily the meds, but the body is turning down. The senses, though, Mary, are the last to go, and you should be cognizant of that in what you're saying in the room, that people are still hearing.
Really? Even if they seem to be sleeping?
Yes. When people have come out of that, they've told us that they heard things that were said. Might be a good time to have music, even singing. I was with a family who began to sing together or say the rosary together. And there's one other element that's for us, I would like to say, is there's something called defection, and it just means disconnecting. But sometimes the dying person, this world is becoming less and less relevant. And I've seen the companions to the dying take that personally, as though suddenly they just weren't interested. We felt really excluded. And just to say up front, that is really not happening.
What do you do to take care of yourself during this long, sometimes long process?
Take time out.
Oh, okay.
The same way the stewardess says, put the oxygen on yourself first, then on the other person. You have to take breaks in this. If you're the primary person and you're there every day, take 1 full day off.
Okay.
If you're coming, say, 3 hours at a time, to step outside 10 minutes every hour. I run cold water on my wrists. You can only say so many times you need to go to the powder room. And it will seem endless sometimes. When I think I can't do it anymore, I say to myself, can you do it 5 minutes more? Because that answer is, yes, I can do 5 minutes more.
Right.
I think laughter is really important during this time. Even if you have to rent funny movies to jumpstart it, you cannot stay in this serious vigil all the time. And cry, for heaven's sakes.
It's okay to do that.
In fact, yes, it's absolutely okay. This culture, the phrases for people who cry, nurses or anyone in attendance, is he broke down, she lost it, she just fell apart.
Flipped out.
Yes, cracked up. What is that in our culture? That losing it, I think, is part of being authentic. This is breaking your heart. And Jesus wept. He didn't have a stiff upper lip. There's a saying, you can't kiss someone with a stiff upper lip.
No, I'm sure you can't. All right, this job sounds so difficult, and it sounds like too much for one person to handle. Don't you need to put together a team?
Oh, one person can't do it. Cannot be done. And I've had widow or widowers who've come and said, I can do this. It cannot be done by one person. I had can just barely be done, but I sure wouldn't recommend it with 2 people. You really need at least 3 people who are shifting this responsibility around, and each person needs their own set of friends that they can go to for laughter and crying. And if it gets heavier than you can do, consult a priest, get a guide of some kind, see a therapist, a wise older person that you know. No, it can't be done without a team. Just can't.
But Peg, what about the suffering?
I haven't seen suffering. Dying is hard and it's difficult, but suffering and struggle, if we keep those two, and it's not just semantics, suffering would be unspeakably intolerable. Struggle is hard and difficult, and our pharmaceuticals are way ahead of pain now. It is so rare to have someone in pain. Very rare. I had a man one time say to me, "I've never been so uncomfortable and I've never been so at peace." Very like the childbirth again. Is that suffering or struggle? It's a quiet birth after a long labor. If we stay, I really like the birthing image.
I do too. I know that you did some volunteer work with the wonderful Mother Teresa in Calcutta. What did you learn?
Well, that's probably where I realized that suffering and struggle were different. A couple people a day died in her center, and there were no meds of any kind, not even aspirin. And the body naturally, now probably not ours because we're used to pharmaceuticals, but the body naturally can kick out enough endorphins, epinephrine, serotonin, even dopamine, that I did not see people suffering, even the children, uncomfortable. But then we also have the blessings of pain meds, which have gotten so sophisticated.
How did that remarkable Teresa deal with the dying?
Well, I imagined there was a training program for volunteers or something. And she went over to the dying person, and she nodded, and she smiled.
And just held the hand.
Said not a word.
Incredible.
Not a word. But now this has been 5 seconds probably. She stayed about 2 or 3 minutes with each person. And the cross was certainly hanging there. But she said not one word. Everybody knows what nodding means.
Yes.
Everybody knows what smiling means, and held their hand.
How beautiful.
That was it.
In your mind, Peg, what are the elements that make for, if there's such a thing, a good death?
That the person be pain-free.
Okay.
That they not feel burdened. That they not be alone, unless if that's what they want. And that they have no regrets. Statistically, 89% of Americans said that they felt they wanted some sense of peace with their Maker, and that they wanted resolved with themselves and in their relationships, were they a good person? Did their life have meaning? And that's what I would call a good death. And when that happens, people report less pain, less anxiety, and a stronger sense that their consciousness exists after the body.
It would be beautiful if every death followed those parameters, but I'm sure it's not always like that, is it? Are there some pretty bad deaths?
Yes, just yes.
Yes.
In spite of everybody's good intentions. Pain is very seldom the problem. It has to be monkeyed with sometime. But what keeps a death from being what I would call a gentle delivery is sometimes the dying person, people die in character. If they're just a crusty old cuss who's been angry, he's an angry person, they're going to die angry. If you've got a person who's the strong, silent type, they aren't going to want to talk about any of this. But the bigger mess, the configuration of the people in attendance can become a mob scene.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I have been part of the mob before. We're living longer, but we're dying more slowly. And when you get everyone together, if you've got a controlling brother, he's going to show up, tell everybody they're not doing it right, and try to take over. If you've got an aunt in this who's dramatic, she is going to arrive and turn this into melodrama. If you've got somebody who's in denial, in the middle of all this, they're going to want to insist that we make plans for Thanksgiving, what we're going to do, and nobody's on the same sheet of music. The stages that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross delineated, the shock, denial, bargaining, anger, depression. You can have every person there is in a different place. And all you can do about it, if the family's got unfinished business, it is going to show up. And if people have got baggage, they're going to arrive and unload the baggage right there. And all you can do, Mary, is stop out for a while, recenter yourself, get some help, but leave the scene. If you can disperse the mob, you'll get further. But yes, there are ones that do not go well.
When a person has reached the terminal stage early in the process, what are their options for care? As soon as you know that that's the situation.
The umbrella of hospital, which will be medical care to keep you alive as long as possible. And there's the umbrella of hospice. And that will be palliative care, just keeping you comfortable, not keeping you alive as long as possible. And if I were sick, the place I would most want to be on the planet is an American hospital. But if you're dying, I think it is good advice to get out of that system. And of course, dying at home is not a new thing. That's how all our ancestors did it.
Right.
Then starting the 40s after the war, it went into hospitals and high tech, and now we're moving back again. The same thing happened with childbirth. It was always done at home. Then we moved into the medical system, and now people are wanting back out of that. Most people would like to die at home. But the truth is, 2 out of 3 die in hospitals or nursing homes and are treated medically.
Why is hospice so underutilized?
Well, this is not assessing blame so much. Doctors are so reluctant to have the conversation, to say, we just don't have anything else to try. And some of it is that is what they dedicated themselves to, keeping you here as long as possible. But some of it is their inability to have the conversation. Then sometimes we have the ill person themselves who doesn't want to bring it up because the family or the doctor will think they've given up. There are a couple misconceptions that I think we could help with today. Many people think hospice is not covered by insurance or Medicare, and Medicare does cover hospice care, and most of the major insurance companies have some provision for hospice, and it's cheaper to die in hospice. The other misconception is that hospice will usher you out quicker by not doing anything. And the statistics on this are very interesting. that of the 5 major kinds of cancers, people live on average 29 days more if they are with hospice than hospital. Just they're comfortable.
That surprises me.
And heart disease, congestive heart failure, people live 100 days on average longer if they are just being kept comfortable. The great sadness for those of us who really love hospice is that it's meant to be a 4 to 6 month stay.
Mm-hmm.
And the statistical mean on that is that most people in this country are with hospice 7 to 10 days. And many are there 2, 3 days.
How can we remedy that situation, or can we?
We're first going to have the conversation with ourselves of literally, what do you want your end of care place to look like? Do you want to be in your home? Are you in your bedroom or the living room? Do you want to be in the hospital? And some people do. And do you want to be in where do you want to be? And then have it with your family and friends. Most people have done their will, have declared power of attorney medically. But have you told them what you want it to look like? And then the whole culture is going to have a conversation about how do we want to take care of each other.
And that should be done earlier rather than later. The earlier it can be done, the better.
You just miss all the benefits. Mary, there is a downside, and I don't want to rhapsodize hospice.
Okay.
When you go to the hospital, you have 24-hour care. Press a button. You have staff who will try to keep you alive. When you go with hospice, if it's a home death, most everything is done by the family. Their nurses come, you have access to nurses, doctors, and a whole team, but you don't have somebody there 24 hours.
Everything you've discussed so far has been in relationship to a person who has their mental capacities. What about the person who has dementia?
Well, it's the living with dementia that's so heartbreaking, but dying with dementia is not that much different than not having dementia in the way you walk with that person. I thought there would be no point in my doing therapy with someone if they had dementia, but I've done it twice now, and I have a very different opinion. The intent is still to be, and to be in their reality, in fact. What is our need to have them in our reality? If
we're uncomfortable if they're not.
And it's our stuff. That you just want, even if a person is far out enough to start saying, the doctor doesn't have all his papers. If you rush in and be in your reality, then you're saying, what kind of papers? What doctor? And then you've just matched their anxiety with more anxiety.
Probably accelerated it.
Yes. If you say, and this is not being patronizing, if you say, I got the papers, don't worry about it. Or I was with a man who meticulously put the date, he wrote the check for everything, and he wanted to keep that list of the CPS, the water, every check he had to write, and keep it in his pocket, and he would take it out frequently. And the soothing thing is just to say, I took care of it. I took care of it. And so I don't think it's that different. There are also moments of clarity with somebody with dementia in which they come back in our world and you realize that there's a lot going on for them. A woman who had been not even able to speak for 2 or 3 months, and the family was talking about a party that was going to happen, and she opened her eyes and said, why can't I go? And as I remember it, the husband said, well, you're in the hospital. And to make a little joke, you have to be here. She turned to her children and smiled and said, I hate it when he's always right. Something's going on. And you just try to match anxiety with soothing. And what difference does it make if, that's not right, what difference does it make? Of course it makes a difference if your father doesn't know you. But he knows someone safe is here. What is it that in us that needs the person to know our name precisely is about our reality. There's a movie, Mary, with Julie Christie, and it's about dealing with someone who has Alzheimer's, and might be something to see.
Now, you're in a situation and you're trying to be of service. Is that wrong? Because we're not doing, we're being.
We're being,
I understand.
yes.
But if your loved one doesn't want to talk, or the person that you're with?
Well, they take the lead, but you're still going to have to do your work on yourself. You are still going to have to stare down in looking at their mortality. What do you believe about impermanence? Or what do you doubt and believe about your maker? Certainly afterlife. What happens? Again, where did we come from? Where are we going? You can't get out of jail free on this one. And there are people who don't want to process it. I worked with a woman, and I didn't realize that she didn't want to process it anymore. And all she wanted to do was watch I Love Lucy reruns with me and not talk. So you're going to have to do your work anyway.
All right. How much can young children be involved in this situation?
I think they should be involved from the get-go.
Really?
Certainly 3 and 4. You say dead, dying, death.
Use the words, okay.
Even preverbal children, Mary, know something's wrong. Something's wrong here. And to pretend really confuses them. The literature in the field is very clear that children need the absolute truth and that they need to see some emotional reaction. You tell a child they're adopted before they know what adopted means, and they grow into the word. And if you say, the reason I'm crying is Grandma's dying and I'm so sad, a 4-year-old knows what's sad. They've been sad.
Oh, yes.
And
frequently
they know that besides crying when you fall down, that you cry when you're sad. To bring them into this perfect time to have the conversation rather than at Sunday school or synagogue. Well, what is it that you do believe? This is the perfect time to bring it up.
Do mystical elements ever enter into the situation?
They happen so often that I've come to expect them.
Really?
They're a man who was a declared atheist, and in the last few minutes lifted his arms up and smiled. And what do you make of that? A man whose custom was to send his wife 1 red rose with a card that said, now I know the difference one can make. And those funeral sprays are wired in tight. They're meant to be transported. And in the carrying out of the casket, 1 rose fell off at the family pew. And what is that?
Certainly sounds like a symbol to me.
A woman who was in Texas and died within a couple of months and had a brother in New York who'd been in a coma for 5 years. And they died at the same time. Same day, same hour. And is that our wishful thinking? Do we make these things up? Is it synchronicity? Collective unconscious? Something's going on.
When someone is actually at the time of death, do they have any control over when that happens?
Looks like it.
Really?
There are just too many stories of doctors saying, I don't see how your sister's going to make it through the night. And the brother's in Japan, and it'll take 2 days. And what we say is miraculously, she didn't die for 3 days. Happens too often. And the opposite of that you can have some families who have stood vigil 24 hours a day, and they leave to just go get a bite to eat in the kitchen, and that's when someone leaves. It needed to be more private for them. I've just almost come to expect it. Sometimes it's helpful even, some families have said, particularly around parents and children, to say, it's okay, we're going to be all right. And very often a person dies within that time. Even
they've been given the
yes,
permission.
A man who fell and broke his leg, not the hip, it was repairable. And his son that night at the hospital said, "Dad, we need to have the discussion about giving up the big house and moving to a one-story smaller." And he said, "Let's talk about that tomorrow," and died that night. That it seems
one way
we
to
do.
Avoid a
yes, we do have.
Peg, after listening to you, I'm wondering, why did you choose to do this work?
Didn't choose it. One of the most important people in my life died when he was too young and I was too young, and I just found myself in this arena and found that I liked it very much. I think it's very sacred work. I like how intimate it is, that you start from the get-go learning what your deepest belief is, what your doubts are and fears are about life. And it keeps me right on the edge of what mine are in looking at that impermanence a great deal of the time. If I say I chose to do service, that's not, I don't mean to be altruistic, because I am served by it. It serves me. The caring is always mutual. And no healer and healed is just a simple walking along holding hands.
All right. What is Peg Armstrong's real belief about death?
It's not nothing.
Oh,
Something is happening, and it's profound, and it deserves our attention as much as living does. I think dying is safe. It looks as though dying is safe, leaving your body, and something's going on out of the human experience.
You've shared so much with us today, Peg, and I thank you, not just for me, but for anyone who watches this. Thank you very much.
You are very welcome.